If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we're back again. We're still with General Bornman, former officer commanding Special Forces Brigade. I don't know which episode this is, probably number 6, but if it's 5, doesn't matter. So you're most welcome, thank you. We've now reached a stage where you go to the infantry school, the School of Infantry to be correct. Can you tell us about it?
Well, yes, it's a wonderful institution. And our School of Infantry has got quite a history. First of all, during the Second World War, that function was done by the military college then in Tabatswane, then Fort Rakkerhoogte, where they trained from staff officers to weapons training. Later, that institution became the Army College when the Air Force and Naval colleges were established. Now, the part of the infantry school that was at the Army College was the weapons training branch. In Afrikaans, they called it Tak Wapenleer, where they trained the guys in machine guns, mortars, and anti-tank weapons. Early in the 60s, they deemed it necessary to establish the School of Infantry at Oudtshoorn. First of all, the climate is very good, versatile climate, but good for an infantryman's environment. And secondly, there was a very big training area adjacent to the area where the school was established. Now, before I carry on with the infantry school, what is an infantryman? It's a foot soldier, nothing else than a foot soldier. A guy who walks on his foot and executes his tasks on foot. But it's not only foot soldiers, they can also be motorized in vehicles, Bedfords or Samels or even Buffels, which was the motorized infantry's vehicle in the operational area. I can really praise the Buffels because they saved many lives with the anti-mine or the mine warfare that was going on, and it was an anti-mine vehicle. And it was the brainchild of a guy called Vernon Joint. And this man, he's still alive today, saved many, many lives with this invention of a V-shaped body to deflect the detonation wave of all the different types of mines. And the other definition is an American definition of an infantryman. It's a guy you hang things on. In other words, you put a backpack on his shoulder, you give him a weapon, you give him ammunition, he must carry his own rations, and he's even connected via the internet while he's walking. So it's a man you hang things on. Then we also have mechanized infantry. These are the people that move on the rattles, fighting vehicles to link up with armor vehicles like armored cars and of course the tanks. The supreme of all armored vehicles is obviously the tank with its formidable weaponry that it could carry. It's a big machine. And then, of course, the notorious paratroopers. They are also infantrymen because when he's on the ground, he's got to walk. So we have it as motorized, mechanized, and airborne. These are the three various things of infantry. Now, these foot sloggers, as we call ourselves, went to Oudtshoorn for our training. And there they trained us in all the support weapons to qualify you, especially from lieutenant to captain. It was anti-tank, machine guns, and mortars, as well as counterinsurgency, as well as conventional or classical warfare, and then all the other things linked to an infantry and the infantry corps. We did our battle handling courses there, our conventional courses, our counterinsurgency courses, so forth. And the infantry school was also there to train the artillery, armor and other arms in counterinsurgency, because once he's out of his tank, he's got to do insurgency, as well as the medical corps, because they had to support these guys on foot to carry on. In 1974, I was transferred from the Army Gymnasium, and as you can recall, the Army Gymnasium moved from Heidelberg to with a junior leader facility to the School of Infantry. I was then transferred to the counterinsurgency wing, and I specialized in urban warfare. Was my field of research and specialty, as well as weaponry. I was involved during my period in the infantry school. I was involved in the RATL development at a very, and I played a very minor role when it came to the deployment of the RATL in counterinsurgency warfare. But later we found out that that was our main task to do. And of course, developing weapons linked to an infantryman, anti-tank grenades, as well as normal rifle grenades that you can fire from the R1, and various pyrotechnics. It was a grand soldier's life at the School of Infantry. The area is very suitable for infantry training, and I remember running from home to the unit, firing a few shots at the range under the hawk eye of an old Second World War veteran. He was then a Major Peter Waterfall, coaching us in musketry, and then taking a quick shower and 7:30 ready to carry on with your daily task. I don't think you can find better than this situation. So we all enjoyed, and the bunch of guys that were there were really excellent people to work with. NCOs, sergeant majors, as well as my fellow officers. I had very good commanders, and so we carried on. In 1975 came Operation Savannah, when we went into Angola. I didn't go and participate in Savannah because I was involved in the counterinsurgency situation and the Rhodesian situation. That was an excellent school for us as young officers to go through. In 1976, I also did my battle group commanders course. I did a pre-course there at the infantry school, and we did a battle group commanders course at the Army College, where you train at unit level an infantry battalion, the element of the armor, an artillery battery to your support, and all these things. It was again a great course, but I think the infantry school prepared me for this quite strenuous course that we had to go through. Was in short, in the meantime, the junior officers and NCOs training went on. They were in various companies, and old Brigadier, later General Barnos, Witko Barnos, was the officer commanding there. And it was a very big unit. At least 5 junior leader companies, and then all these other specialist training, the conventional wing and the counterinsurgency wing. So it was a great unit. And if I look back today, the area of Oudtshoorn and its people, beautiful people, a lot of the retired officers and NCOs, they reside in that area. The sea is very close. It's an hour's drive from Oudtshoorn, and I love the sea. And I think it's the best of both worlds. In winter, it was very cold. The Outoniqua Mountains, that is closer to the sea, to the southern side, full of snow. And then the Swartberg Mountains to the northern side, covered in snow. And we in Oudtshoorn are in the middle. It was quite cold, but we all survived. The heat was also very strenuous on training, but we started 5 o'clock in the morning and have a rest period over the heat of the day, and then carried on till 6 o'clock in the evening. So we adapted to the heat situations, and soldiers must work under these circumstances. That is unfortunately so. And later we can talk about heat exhaustion and these things. I'm not going to go into depth at the moment. So of course this was the School of Infantry, a proud unit to be. The insignia is the 2 crossed bayonets, and till today it's a proud institution to be a member of and to be associated with the School of Infantry there in Oudtshoorn. And this is in very short. If there are any questions, I'll gladly answer them.
I wonder, sir, what you will do one day when I say to you, I have no questions. But of course I do.
No, that's your work. It's your work to ask questions.
It's a real privilege to talk to you, sir, I have to tell you. I would like to know, the mechanized infantry, were they fighting from the vehicles, or would they get out the bus and fight as infantry?
In both circumstances. First of all, traveling in the rattle vehicles, which is an absolute fantastic vehicle for mechanized infantry. It gives you cover against small arms fire, excuse me, as well as mortar shrapnel and artillery shrapnel. I'm not talking about big pieces and direct hits and things like that. The rattle is also armed with 2 machine guns and a 20mm gun, which is a formidable weapon. So it can look after itself. Now, terrain is the biggest obstacle for a rattle or infantry fighting vehicle, just the common name on that. In very densely bush, it's difficult. We call it bundu bashing. You can move, and the rattle is a very strong vehicle, and tiny trees and things like that, it's really not in its way. But big ditches and barbed wire fences, and of course landmines is really a threat to the rattle. So they travel in this vehicle, and once they're at a target where the infantry has got to clear the target. For instance, there's trenches around a enemy occupied position or an enemy base. The infantry's got to debus. Even the doors that fling open while debussing gives protection to these soldiers. So he can have armor protection right up to the objective. Then he can debus and he can do his normal infantry work, clearing buildings, clearing trenches, and clearing an area where the infantry fighting vehicles cannot go. And then still, this 20mm gun and machine guns on the rattle can give fire support. The ideal thing is, of course, in a battle, is to go in with the infantry fighting vehicles supported by artillery to give fire support on the target, to give us maximum distance between debussing and the target, as well as, of course, as the armor, to take care of enemy tanks and enemy fortifications and so forth, and to take out anti-aircraft positions of the enemy. And then, of course, the support of the Air Force, also delivering fire, a bombardment on the target, as well as giving close air support into certain positions, especially when there's bunkers that you cannot reach and so on. Then the Air Force comes in handy. So these vehicles, the prerequisite for a successful attack on any enemy institution will be supported by the artillery, the armor, and well as the Air Force. Then you've got a formidable combination. Once the target is cleared, okay, trenches is a problem. The vehicles can come back, and the mechanized infantrymen can get into their vehicles, close the hatches, still having support. The infantry fighting vehicle, as I said, is vulnerable to obstacles, man-made obstacles and natural obstacles. But it's got a very good clearance over ditches and so on. And then, of course, landmines is a serious threat, because one landmine can damage the vehicle, and there's about 12 people in this fighting vehicle. A landmine can, and then obvious, if an anti-tank or a tank fires at a rattle, it's a problem, and therefore you need the support of the artillery, the Air Force, and the other forces that's there. But also a vehicle that saved many lives and that got the troops fresh, ready for the attack. And it's just a wonderful, there's new developments now in South Africa. I mean, you've got to develop. And I think the rattle is on its way to be phased out. But the rattle did his job while he was there. And there's one person that was really very influential in the development of the rattle, and it's called General Roland de Vries, and people of Arms Corps and the various affiliates. Rattle is also sought very much by foreign countries to be used, because for its time it was the best that really there was in the world. So we can fight in the vehicle and outside the vehicle, to answer your question.
I've heard a few things about the rattle, so I don't know if it's true. But you know, part of this program is to dispel myths where we find them. I've heard about a soldier who had an accidental discharge inside a rattle. And they say because of the armor inside as well, of course, this bullet started shrieking around there. And in the process, I believe more than one soldier died or was seriously wounded. Have you ever heard of such a case?
Because I can't recall a specific case, but it is true, because the thickness of the armor protection is thick, and a ricochet can really happen. Accidental discharge inside, or a stray bullet or a bullet from outside coming in, and especially in RPG and enemy anti-tank weapons, when it gets into a vehicle. That's why the soldiers must debus as quick as possible with good fire support. Fire is everything. There's nothing that can beat fire on the target to give you that support. But yes, I think that is possible. I can't recall a specific incident that I have heard of, but it is possible, because the armor protection is quite strong, and you know, a bullet just being discharged, he can swing around and he can cause damage.
So that shows the high standards of training for that soldier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If a hand grenade goes off from a soldier by accident, it's a problem in a rattle. If a white phosphorus grenade goes off, and the same applies for traveling in helicopters, it's a problem. You're in a confined space. You're absolutely in a confined space. And then gas, if you think of chemical warfare, you're in a confined space. You've got to get out. You know, you can find everything there. That is the problem. Of course, that is why I'm a foot soldier. I'm a walking infantryman, because vehicles pick up mines. Paratrooping is a different story, and that parachute is just to bring you to the ground, to carry on foot again. And mechanized infantry, I really like, but I prefer to do these things on my 2 feet.
Well, they say that the infantry is the queen of battle, you know.
Oh, yes.
And then I want to say something, and perhaps you can correct me or agree with me, that the armor cannot go, they cannot function without the infantry protection.
Because, yes, the queen of the battle situation, comparing it to chess, because the queen can move frequently, they can go anywhere. but she's also vulnerable. That we must remember. The main thing is an enemy target is not in the open field. There's always trenches, there's always bushes, there's always camouflage. And remember, they've also got support weapons. They've also got mortars. They've also got artillery. They've also got anti-tank weapons. They've also got machine gun positions. And these things have got to be cleared out before the armor can move on. Because an enemy with an RPG is a threat to any armor vehicle. Rattle, our tanks, as well as our armored cars, and of course soft wheel vehicles like SAMLs and this type of thing. And the infantry can clear that. The armored car regiments and units, they've got a support troop to do the local clearing for the armored cars. They do the same work as an infantryman, but it's on the infantry principles. But if I'm now talking that support group or support troop of the armor, they can clear a very small surrounding because it's not large in numbers. But if you attack a base or a fortified position, you need people on the ground clearing that whole position, and then you fight man to man. That is the situation that we have. But the infantry is the queen of the battle. But from time to time, she gets hammered. That is also true.
They say that speed is armor. But obviously at some stage these vehicles have to come to an halt for the night, perhaps, or to refuel or something. How would the infantry protect them?
Yes, that is most definitely so. It's by entrenching the area where they go into. They go into a lager or an echelon. They pull back to an echelon to get refueled, replenished, to get the mechanical problems sorted out, to get new ammunition and this type of thing. And then they are vulnerable. And normally it's the job of the infantry to protect them by means of occupying certain tactical grounds, higher hills and so on, protecting paths and possible enemy routes that the enemy can take. And then obviously the other thing is they're also vulnerable then against enemy artillery fire, or for that matter, for enemy air force bombs and machine guns and so forth. And therefore you need a favorable air situation where our air force is superior and we control the skies, and then the infantry on the ground must cover that area where the armor replenishes and they refuel and do these things ready for the next day's battle. But that is true. It's a task of the infantry.
I am jumping a bit ahead here, but did we have air superiority all the time?
Are you talking about the Bush war now in Angola?
Yes.
Remember, the higher north we went up, the smaller time over target we had with our aircraft. But most of the time we had air superiority. But remember, the most we go in. But the enemy aircraft were just a buggerance factor, to use that word. They were just a buggerance factor. Because if they detected us, they could bring in more aircraft. They've got the intelligence where we are, and they can direct enemy artillery onto our positions and make it much more difficult for you. But I want to say about 80% of the time we had air superiority. First of all, air superiority is not only based when you can fly wherever you want. It's also supported by radar. It's also supported very strongly by intelligence about enemy aircraft, and that we had. Obviously, the enemy forces, I'm talking about the Cuban and FAPLA forces, SWAPO didn't have any aircraft. 80% of the time we had it, but the further north we went up, this problem became bigger. Because in helicopter, you can establish a helicopter replenishment point at any position you want. They can refuel, and they can rearm, get ammunition, and smaller repairs can be done there. And then they can go up further north. But not these fast aircrafts. They cannot land somewhere. They could land it on Giva, the old Pereira Dash, in Angola, and we've established certain positions there for them. But it just gives you a little bit of longer time over the target, and that's the most important. And all our operations were worked out maximum time over target. So, of course, yeah, and remember, we were in another country's airspace. We were in the Angolan airspace. But they were never 1 or 2 times that they came over into the Namibian airspace. That one stage in the east where one of their bombs went into a buffalo and 10 people were killed. That was unfortunate. That's the closest that we got, but those were Cubans. Here and there, a Fapla guy. And supporting UNITA and these people, they were just a buggerance factor, but our guys, of course, let me tell you one thing. We had the most efficient and dedicated pilots. And I'm talking about helicopters as well as our fixed wing and our fighter jets that I think this world hasn't seen. These guys were excellent. There's one guy, Colonel Johan Rankin. He's got 2 confirmed kills with his Mirage onto the MiGs. Yeah, that's because, but remember, it's not only the aircraft, it's a system. Electronic warfare, intelligence, as well as radar. You must combine these things with the aircraft. It's not only one aircraft flying. And
Yeah,
our Air Force guys.
I would actually love to speak to some Air Force people as well as Navy people. Up to now, we've only had Army and police. But I'm sure they will arrive and they will tell us all these stories as well. I know that the South African Air Force had higher turnaround ratings than the Israeli Air Force. In other words, they could rearm that aircraft in record times. I mean, it's so far above which the NATO countries can do, and that was, I suppose, because they had to. You know, if you have to do something, you're normally very good at it. Which comes back to training, which brings me back to the School of Infantry. Now, would the School of Infantry also be known, what people tell me about JLs? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, that's the junior leaders. That's what we did in Heidelberg. Then it was transferred over to Oudtshoorn and it is still there. It's your junior leaders. Guys coming in, they're being selected. They go to the units and they pick the guys there, certain profile. And then they bring them there and they go through the training and they either become second lieutenants to become platoon commanders or corporals that become platoon sergeants and section leaders.
So
and you know,
I'm listening.
It's about 9 months that whole training period, selection training and everything. And then for a whole year, that guy's deployed. And you know, some of these guys, and they 18, 19 years old, and they get deployed with a platoon of 3-2 Battalion or the Bushmans into Angola, independent. And this young little guy has got to train these guys. So the training had to be fit and the selection had to be very good. And I'm telling you, these guys did it. And of course, I want to say something. And I've been in both worlds. We always talk, and all due respect, we always talk about the recce's and the paratroopers and so on. They good and excellent, and I stand with him. But the most important thing of the war that we waged in Angola and in Namibia was the foot soldier, the infantryman on the ground. They kept the things at bay. They didn't see much of the actions. Well, they saw some contacts during patrolling and so forth. But they were the guys who flushed the area, who controlled the area, and who brought the intelligence down to us. And when I speak about 5-4 Battalion, I'll embroider on this situation. It was excellent. And it's young chaps that we had, black and white, that we could put in the field. And they learned very, very, very quickly. And I take my hat off for the foot soldier during our war in Namibia.
Well, they called it the Corporal's War, didn't they, at one stage?
Not quite the corporal. I think they must include the lieutenants as well. It reminds me of a joke. When you become an officer, you've got to do a language proficiency test. You must be able to speak Afrikaans and English at a certain level, reading and writing and speaking. And they asked this question to a guy, and they said, "What's your opinion on corporal punishment?" And he said, "No, I don't think it's fair. The sergeants must also be punished." So that's just a little joke in between.
No, that's excellent. Can you tell me, sir, how would a normal day look like at the School of Infantry?
Okay, I've explained to you doing not every day, but running and a little bit of musketry lessons by Sir Peter Waterfall, which was excellent. Then 8:30 you're there, you do your admin. 8 o'clock, there's normally the old meeting here and there. I refer to it as mothers' meetings, waste of time. One must do the job. You mustn't sit around the conference table. And then we started either lecturing or the troops were in the field and you started with your field training. Breakfast is then already served and you carry on and you've got a break for lunch. And at 5, 6 o'clock tonight, if there's not night training, you break for the day. In the evenings, there are also lectures, but it's more not military subjects. You bring a lot of visiting lecturers. You speak to the troops about the situation, the political situation, the war situation, and a lot of subjects on vocational training, what they do after the army, and well as ethnology. And honestly, when it comes to ethnology, I think we must make that a serious subject, and not just by a visiting lecturer and these things, talking about different cultures and so on. That's so important. Anthropology, as they call it nowadays, is a must. We don't know the people that we are working with. We don't know the people that we are fighting against.
Now, you say to me, this place is at Oudtshoorn, and I know in Oudtshoorn is a lot of ostriches. Were there any incidents with an ostrich?
Because regarding the ostriches, look, it's a vicious animal. But luckily in the training area, there were no ostriches left. Before 1960, there were ostrich farms there. There was just a few wild donkeys, but they didn't pose any threat. But when we did these, what we call fastbait, it's the long-term exercises, a final selection with the leader group. Obviously, they had to move through farms, and there were quite a few instances where they were chased by a male ostrich. And remember, the male breeds in the night on the eggs, and the female, the gray one, in the day. But luckily, no fatalities or any damage to the ostriches. And of course, the main thing with an ostrich, and that they tell you there at the ostrich farms, to have a branch with a few thorns and just keep that between you and the male. But I've never tried that. I don't want to try it because that guy's got a kick in him. And remember, his elbows the other way around than our knees and elbows. And they can be vicious. But on the other hand, it's a peaceful animal. Once domesticated, I won't say very tame. Talking of them, what I don't like is these jockeys on the animals. They're not built for human beings. That's not the right way to treat these animals, really. But a nice animal, and while we're talking about them, while in Messina, a lady once gave me an ostrich eggs because they're in the wild there. And I opened it, and it was the most beautiful omelet that I could ever build. Equivalent of 24 chicken eggs, and the taste is not wild. It's excellent and very good. But we didn't encounter major problems with the ostriches.
I have to say to you, sir, I was giggling there in the background because I could just imagine a bunch of ostriches chasing a platoon down. It is a vicious animal. I mean, what do you do? I mean, where do you start shooting at it? It's, as you know, my wife here, where we're recording as a school, an English school, where she teach French people how to speak English and Spanish, apparently. And they have a trick question there in one of their lessons, where they ask if a chicken can fly. And most astonishingly, the answer is yes, a chicken can fly, even if not very far. But I don't think an ostrich can fly. I mean, in no way in the world.
No, that's one thing. An ostrich can't fly. If you look at his body and you look at the wingspan, those wings are merely just arms. But most definitely, they can't get any grip on air. But chickens, yes, they can, but very short. And if you look at the other birds like guinea fowl and these birds, they fly, but for a short area. They're not flying birds. It's just to get them out of the trouble. And the guinea fowl and partridges and so on. Same with the chicken. And the old big rooster that crows in the morning, he can fly for a very short distance because the body is too heavy for the wingspan. But the hens, lighter hens, they can, but very short. They're not built to fly. It's not flying birds, it's walking birds.
I'm sorry, I'm still giggling, so I still have this idea in my head of people learning. So if I made some funny noises, please forgive me. You know, in the Army, it's all about leadership. And I think that the School of Infantry produced leaders.
Oh yes. It's one man, and it's a platoon of up to 30 plus or minus, and he's got to lead them into battle. And he's got to keep their morale high. He's got to know them. And he's the commander of that group. And we took these young guys, 18 years old, qualified at the infantry school. We take him, we give him a platoon and tell him, there you go, friend. Let's see what you can do.
And they did produce. I mean, people
yes.
they also have extremely high regard.
Oh yes, no, of course, our young chaps, the leader group and the non-leader group, our soldiers who have excellent material, really. Obviously, once you get to the operational area, the sifting has been done. But really, I've got the highest esteem of our troops. Look, there were problems, and you had your problem children, and you had difficult ones. It's human. It's absolutely human just to have that. But I take my hat off for what they did and what they accomplished, and the way they supported the operational tasking. No, South African, black and white, they make very good soldiers and good leaders as well. Can I just tell something very interesting? With all these interviews, like the Parabats, they didn't like guys with tattoos because they used to belong to gangs, and it showed an ill-spent youth. Well, nowadays tattoos are so common. I don't know what's the policy now, but with one of these discussions, they asked this one guy, "Okay, you went to high school, yes." Yes, I was. Any leadership positions? He said yes. In the school cadet situation, he was the marker, and that was his leadership position in the school. Not a prefect or a head boy or class captain or anything. No, he was just the marker when they drilled in the cadet periods.
But even that, I mean, some people find it amazing when I tell them that the Army actually got hold of you at the age of 14 with a cadet corps. And,
Yeah.
perhaps you can explain that to us here, General. Did that play a role? Do you think that prepared the young man before he went to the Army?
Most definitely. Look, the Cadet Corps, and that's a common thing. England has got the same situation, and in America it's the same. And with the Germans, it was the Jugend, but that was a different emphasis on them. It was to get them into the political situation. But as from your fourth year in the high school, no, your second year in high school, you were drafted into the cadet situation. You were given a uniform and they drilled. And then, of course, they had a band. Each school had a band, and there were competitions and house competitions, and especially the April holiday season. There were camps that the Army had, and I attended every one of them. And that's actually where I thought this life as a soldier is good, to have pips on your shoulder, and the type of life that they present, the discipline, the leadership, and these things. I enjoyed my cadet courses at camp, and I personally was in the band for no other specific reason, and I played a bugle, and that's the only instrument that I could ever play in my life was a bugle. And now, if you ask me, I can't even produce a note. But it was good. It gave you that feeling, that discipline, and to make you a proud South African. It was very important, the Cadet Corps. Yes. And in the military, we used to support the schools when they have these camps over the holiday periods. And we gave our instructors to instruct them and to teach them map reading and these things, just to get them acquainted. And that really prepared them. It prepared them for the military because they saw the military. My first instance was I got on the train in Springs and we went to Johannesburg alone. I was in standard 8. I was about 14 years old. And we got off, and there was this funny corporal. Later, I found out he was just in the administrative corps. And he started shouting and screaming and swearing at us. Then we had to go to for a medical. And the old doctor was really an old man, and he just asked, "Have you got any problems?" We said no, and he signed everyone's certificate, medically fit for military duty. And then they took us to Voortrekker Hoogte, now Tabachwane, and gave you a haversack, and you had to fill it with straw. That was your mattress. It was adventurous. And so we just carried on. And I liked the military life, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah, I attended such a course myself. I think I was also in standard 8, and it was for about a week or 2 weeks, can't remember, but it was great fun. It was great fun to shoot and to walk the patrols and to see what the Army was up to. But I have to say, our teachers at the schools where I were, and also the officers, they were a bunch of slopgatte, if I can use that word.
Yeah.
They were really not the military types. They should never have been officers in my eyes. But
while at university or teachers training college, they took them to courses which we called OCOs. It's just an acronym for the Teachers Cadet Corps. And I agree with that. some of them were good. My principal in Heidelberg, he was a lieutenant colonel in the Cadet Corps, and he was a devoted man. Obviously, the other teachers just had to fall in, and that we had some good ones, but there was some of these guys. You know, later when you saw an officer, these guys were not really officers material. They were not into it. Our bandmaster was a good guy. He didn't know anything of music, and the music teacher used to come and give us a few tips to be on the note and what note to play and this type of thing. But no, I agree with that. They also went on courses, you believe me, but they were teachers, good guys, but they were not military men. You can't compare them with a full-time military officer or a non-commissioned officer. You can't do that because it's not their career. It's not their way of thinking.
I just want to explain to those who perhaps were not at school in those days. One day a week, I believe for us it was Thursdays, you would be in uniform, in your cadet uniform. That would be your school uniform for the day. And then you had a period like an hour or something which you would march around. And then we also had a shooting range where you could shoot a .22 rifle.
That's correct. Yeah.
And of course, at the shooting range, there was no playing around. I have to say the teacher officer there in charge really knew what he was doing. But it had nothing to do with combat shooting. It was just lying there and shooting at the stationary target. But it's a good thing too, because I can believe that by the time you arrive in the army, well, most of us could shoot already. I mean, we grew up with weapons, but I believe there are people who didn't. And so this would have taken them through. So it's a very good thing, actually, with Cadet Corps. But I think it disappeared now, sir, isn't it? It doesn't exist anymore.
No, it's not existing. And I've had chats with many of people. You know, they feel it necessary to bring that back. And can I just say something about our leadership guys? I found my best troops in the field were farm boys from the Eastern Cape and from Natal, the Free State and the Transvaal. But a thoroughbred farm boy was a guy that could adapt to the field. And then pupils that went to technical school. In the old days, we referred to them as going to a spanner school, but no, these guys, they could fix anything, you know, from motor vehicles to weapons and these things. They were technically inclined. And when it came to electronics, they were good. And these were guys who really excelled in the Defense Force. Okay, there's some fallouts out of this group as well, but really I liked the technical school guys who got their matric or O levels at the technical school, and then these farm boys, as we call in Afrikaans, Plaasiens, they made very, very, very good soldiers. Yeah, but all in all, I'm a proud man when I talk about our troops and what they did, and the normal infantryman. And you know what, Koos? The normal infantry soldier didn't get all the equipment. The recce's, and talking now as a guy who was involved in the recce's and the paratroopers, they got a very good webbing and rucksacks and weaponry. And this old infantryman, he had to survive with just post Second World War webbing, where you put your ammunition, you put your rations, sleeping bag, and water. Okay, the rifles were all R1s and later R4s. But these other guys got very good equipment. Later, they became equal regarding the equipment.
It's fascinating to me that I sometimes see the infantry patrols walking around with the old brain gun. In the early days, you can figure out from which era they are. Just look at their rifles. And
yeah. And the reason for that was LMGs were scarce, and the brain gun was converted from 303 over to 7.62. It wasn't as heavy as the LMG, I never used brain guns, but they were good. But give me an LMG anytime, and give me a 20 millimeter from a helicopter anytime. Then I can operate.
I've heard a story that when Rhodesia came to a fall, or when he changed to Zimbabwe, that the South African Army left because it was on loan to them about 1,200 mags, which is the light machine gun, the FM mag. I don't know if it's true, but I've heard that we did ask for those weapons back and they somehow refused, or it never returned to the South African arsenals. Would you know anything about that?
Yes. Those weapons are still there. They're still there with the Rhodesian army, and they also believe in it. And speaking to the other side, various situations, that was one of the things on a patrol level that they were afraid of, is our machine gun. Well, look, the Russian PKM is also a very good machine gun, make no mistake. But the 7.62 had a very, very good penetration and sustained fire. Okay, the Sand in Novemberland and these belts didn't always work together. But all in all, if you look in a platoon, you had 3 LMGs. Each section had an LMG, number 1 and 2, and the corporal in charge of the LMG section. And that's firepower. Of course, fire is everything. Firepower is everything. In any war, conventional war, the counterinsurgency situation, if you have firepower, you are the winner. If you don't have firepower, you're not going to win.
I've spoken quite a bit now with RSM James Tatra, who you know very well.
Oh, yes.
And RSM Tatra is something of a legend, and we know he's been in Special Forces forever. And he loves to talk about the profile of a Special Forces person. But now I want to ask you, sir, give me the profile of an infantryman in South African Army.
First of all, motivated, fit, leadership abilities, ability to adapt to a bush or an urban situation. Remember, all our fighting wasn't always just in the bush. And controlling his men, and then perseverance. That's the main thing of the infantryman. You must persevere.
So he's a tough guy, sir.
Yeah, he must be tough. No, infantryman must be tough. Not that the armor or the artillery guy is not tough, but this guy must be mentally as well as physically tough. And he must.
I'm just trying to imagine the scenario for people here. I mean, if you use a mechanized infantryman, he's inside that armored vehicle. He can hear probably the bullets clanging against the armor. Doors open, out you go. And I've never heard of one of them ever saying, no, I don't think so. They just went out and they formed those lines of them and they start sweeping. It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's amazing, really. They did well. But remember, then they had fire support from the gun on the infantry fighting vehicle, the rifle, and mortar support, and Air Force artillery, and all these things. Then you win the firefight.
How do you keep control, sir, in a firefight like that? Because it's one hell of a noise. It's confusing.
We call it drills. There's a specific drill that you exercise. And training. In training, you force that onto these guys. And when there's a lack period, take them off to the range and let them do fire and movement. And that's what it's called, fire and movement. The one group fires and the other group moves forward. And so they leapfrog. And the main role player in firing movement is the LMG. Can I just tell something about James Tatra? Later years, I jumped quite often with him with a tandem parachute where it's 2 people under a canopy. And the one night in Palaborwa, we were doing an exercise and we were dropped on a rocky ridge And the doctor had to help me with my knee, but I was fit the other day as well. All the rugby injuries and so on coming forward. And the last time I jumped with him was in the Limpopo River, back to my old hunting grounds. We were having an exercise there. And it was late afternoon, and we jumped from quite a high altitude. And as the canopy deployed and everything was stable, he handed me a beer. He said, "Sir, here's a beer. I'm sober, I'm driving this shoot, but you can have a beer." It was one of the most beautiful beers, and I'll thank old James. Yeah, what an excellent guy. What a mentor for young guys. What a star.
Yeah, he's just one of a fantastic person to interview as well, you know, so he's one of the stars of the show, actually. I'm really grateful for him. I suppose that was during your time as commanding general of the Special Forces Brigade.
Yeah, that was that time. And now where we are now, he's my neighbor. Adjacent, he's in a complex, I'm on a farm, and we are neighbors. I see him quite often here. It's nice to know that James is near me.
Yes, he's the man who I think you would like to have close by.
Yeah.
In the times of South Africa, which we had now with the riots, the Zuma riots, sadly so. I want to ask you, sir, that I just want to make sure that we understand correctly the principle of JLs or the School of Infantry. These young men already completed their basic training by the time they arrive with you at their regiments.
Yes, they completed their basic training, but then they go through another phase of basic training. Can I say a refresher? Because remember, at the units that they are going in training, they've got to give basic training. But then it's more on the phase of training methods. And you teach them how to teach the troops musketry, drilling, first aid, and all these basic subjects, which is so important. And then they start with their leadership training in counterinsurgency, conventional, and whatever the case might be. So yes, they have a refresher on basic training, and then they start with their leadership training. At the end of their training, they go through a interview phase, and there's a selection board selecting the guys, whether which ones will be officers and which ones will be NCOs. And then there's this big passing out parade. And then they are given a small holiday, and then back to the sticks again, and there they go.
It seems to me... I'm listening.
In the olden days, we did this in 3 months. They did 3 months basic training. 3 months they came in at the Army Gymnasium and did officer training, and then 3 months they were sent to units. But then the war was at a very, very, very low intensity. Now we've got about 8 months to train this guy properly in the situation, and this is where the 2-year national service compulsory period came in very handy regarding this. And then the guy had a year. Otherwise, he had only a few months at the unit. I mean, that's not cost effective. And we deemed it necessary. And look, I was a second lieutenant too, and a lieutenant. A lieutenant is nothing else than an officer under instruction. Remember that. In the police, a lieutenant is a very senior big guy, because they've got a different rank structure. But the lieutenant, once you become a captain, and if you're a major, you're a senior officer, then you start knowing what's going on in the defense force. But then a lieutenant is and the same applies to these guys. And really, they did well. They did excellent jobs, really. Sorry, because I interrupted you, but this is a very important thing that I had to mention.
No, that's so fascinating, sir, because I recall that, and I don't know if it's true, but I read it somewhere in a book, that during the Vietnam War, they ran out of helicopter pilots. And so they decided they're going to go to the youngsters who's just enlisting and tell them, look, if you want to be a helicopter pilot, we'll train you, we'll make you a warrant officer. Do you want to fly? And would you believe those youngsters just stood up and said, man, we'll go. And they they got their pilots. While the older men, who were very experienced pilots, they were not so keen on flying, in combat, especially in something like Vietnam, where they lost about 10,000 helicopters. Not all of them were lost, just that was the amount which I've heard them count. So it seems to me that someone, and I would like to know who, if it's possible, who worked out this curriculum at the School of Infantry and decided we can do whatever we want to these youngsters. They're going to perform. They're young minds. They like response, and they've got the young bodies. They can do this. Who made that decision, sir? Because that is strategically a fantastically good decision.
This came from the top level of the Defence Force, and it's been driven with the threat on hand. Remember, we're a Defence Force, but it was driven with the intelligence on hand and what lied ahead to envisage that, and then they formed the strategy, and the syllabus had to fit the strategy for the Defence Force. And we had the manpower, these young guys. We really had them. You know, of course, in the Second World War, nobody realizes this. They had officers, but remember, our Defence Force was very small. And one of the war heroes in the Second World War, General Dan Pienaar, I doubt whether he had matric. He was a substantial lieutenant, second lieutenant, and a temporary major general. Can you see the gap? Although he did a course in England, we call it a long gunnery course, where the Brits taught him the finer points of gunnery, and they could do it because they had a regular army. But our people were not very well trained in the Second World War. In the field, people were made lieutenants. They needed officers. They took some of their bright guys and they gave them what they call field ranks. We were in a more fortunate position. We could train these guys in a year's time. We had them for a year to be trained, and they operated for a year. And many of them joined permanent force. That was our recruitment ground for that. And these guys went in, after the 2 years, went into the citizen force regiments and in our commandos. If they were farmers, they joined the commandos as a well-trained platoon command. And they excelled on their courses. That's where the Donitron Combat School came in. And most of them became senior officers in the various units that they went into.
How important is professionalism in the army?
Everything, because you work with lives. You work with lives. We're in protecting life business of our own men. No, you've got to be professional. You've got to have the knowledge, the skills, and all these things, and the weapons and the skills to utilize the weapons. No, you must be professional. That's the main thing.
And would you consider the army at that stage to be exactly that, professional?
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. Look, there were problems. There were a lot of shortcomings due to various reasons, but we were a professional army. Really, we were a professional army.
I want to ask your opinion, sir, on which would you prefer, the R1 or the R4, R5, AK-47? What do you think is my ideal rifle for the infantryman?
I used both in combat. The R1 will always be my favorite. It's got penetration capabilities. The R4, nothing wrong with it. But if you attack bunkers and people behind logs and this type of thing, the R1, there's nothing wrong with the R1. The 3-2 battalion troops always told me, R1 is number one. The AK is a good weapon, an excellent weapon for the field. But the penetration capabilities is not good. if you compare it to an R1 or even an R5. It's the R1 is a but we still have the R1, and the advantage of the R4 a little bit shorter, and I've used that in combat. Really, well, it's like choosing between your mother-in-law and your sister. They both related to you.
Yeah, that's a hard one to choose, actually.
Yeah, very difficult.
I'll take my mother-in-law. I have to put it on
Okay.
record here. But
Luckily, I don't have a sister, so
yeah, no, you could get away with it. I have to ask you again, so I know you had a daughter in the military. I think the other two as well. Were there any female soldiers at the School of Infantry in your time?
no. In the support staff, yes. Logistics, signals, administrative, the personnel corps, finance corps, and this, but to be trained as infantrymen, not in my time. But nowadays, yeah, they do have female. I've got my own reservations. It is not very positive, but you know what the politics are.
Yes,
And,
I think everyone is equal, and the thing is, we're not equal. And a man is simply stronger than a woman. End of story. That's for science. And when
And
you
that-
carry these burdens, it will have an effect. It must.
The upper body of a man is much stronger than, I'm talking about the average man, stronger than the average woman. And especially when it comes to special forces, when you jump with kit, your upper body must be strong, and the same applies to the paratroopers. And you must pull those rigs, and you must organize the situation. Look, women can do skydive. They fantastic free fallers and skydivers. But don't attach kit to them, because then it's difficult to steer that situation, and especially if you in a difficult situation with emergencies and so forth.
Yeah, with military parachuting has very little to do with civilian skydiving. It's not the same.
No, precisely.
It's like climbing. It's not the same. But I need to ask you, so when we started talking, you said you came to a School of Infantry and you became an urban warfare expert. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that is right about the time when Savannah took place, which is the opposite, which is a counterinsurgency, even though that was more conventional or classic, I think, as you said, you use the word.
Yeah, more classical warfare. Of course, we deemed it necessary in the counterinsurgency wing to specialize in, apart from the normal fighting that we do, training, not fighting. We deemed it necessary to specialize in a certain region, and we foresaw that we could fight and combat insurgents in urban areas. At that stage, Ireland was really the school of us in urban warfare. And we did a lot of studies regarding the situation in Ireland and the Brits problem with bombs going off and snipers firing at soldiers and this type of thing. And that's where I started doing research in this situation regarding crowd control and so forth. So that is why we decided, and I felt it I found it very interesting. It really opened my mind, because the bush war was there, and I enjoyed that as well. But we had to carry on, and we developed certain shooting exercises on the range, where we took a lot of old car wrecks and having the guys in the butts, and we dressed the targets with red flags and clothing and this type of thing, and then we bombarded them with smoke grenades and so on, and then they had to fire certain tables on the ground, and this just orientated the guys to the urban situation. It's a very difficult war. And I mentioned it in the previous program. At Katlong, one day, 10,000 guys attacked us in a Casper. Luckily, we could handle the situation. And no fatalities on their side. It's very easy to open a machine gun on them, like it happened in the Eastern Cape. But that's not what you want. You want to disperse them and get control over an area. That was the main aim. But that is why we did that.
I would like to know how much scope for initiative would there be for a training instructor at a place like the School of Infantry?
As wide as you can get, initiative was given, provided it was in the gambit of safety and that you could motivate the situation, and you had to consult your seniors by the officer commanding. But initiative was given to us, and it was actually promoted. What can we do here? And at the infantry school, we had constant sessions, all the staff together about fire and movement and the minor tactics regarding that. How do we counter anti-tank weapons? How do you counter anti-aircraft weapons during an attack? What do you do if you're encircled by armor, enemy armor? And in the urban situation, how could you control an area? What's the best way of getting information? No, we were constantly in class, which is not the wrong thing to do, but initiative was given. It was wide open, because you could, provided that it's, that it's within the law and within the training guidelines and safety first.
Have you ever seen foreign officers there on a visit?
Yes, Israelis. But that was about all. Here and there a foreign visitor, but on the diplomatic role. But look, at that stage, we only had the amigos. A few South American countries and the Israelis and the French. Yeah, that was the amigos. We didn't have a lot of contact. Of course, the Rhodesians came over quite often on visits, and we tapped their brains on various things. It was just not a visit and take them to the ostrich farm. We sat down and we talked about things. That was very nice. Portuguese, no, they never came in my time. I never saw the Portuguese officers from Mozambique or Angola. We never saw them. Some of our people went to Angola on a course. That was very informative. I went to Rhodesia for an extensive course, which was really very good to me. And I must say, there was a Air Force guy, old Brand Hasbrook. He was the officer commanding of the Impala Squadron in Port Elizabeth. And after that, we got together and we worked out a thing. I was busy with an urban, with a rural course. And on an attack on an enemy base, we worked out the tactics. And that morning, 5 o'clock in the summer, 4 Impalas took off in a little place called Oudtshoorn. And we did the attack on the range, and it went well. And I mean, my guys, this was common practice in the operational area with all the big attacks that we had and big operations. But the funny thing is, the people phoned the officer commanding, complaining about the noise. And the one old lady, and she was speaking Afrikaans, she said, "Sir, your airplanes took off from my kitchen and they landed in my lounge this morning. What's wrong?" Well, it's one of those things the civilians had to prepare for this. And this is the type of things that we did, and the scope that we were given. Of course, we could do all these things. And I did all these tactical experiments during training and on courses. which came handy in the operational area. Then, of course, helicopters came. Whenever there was exercise, there was a helicopter there, and the guys were used to helicopters, Pumas as well as Alouettes. So we prepared them for war.
Would you consider the army in general to be risk averse?
Training-wise, or
Training wise, sir.
yes, most definitely.
Which brings me to heat exhaustion. Can you tell me about that?
Of course, yes. Especially with my experience in Palaborwa. We lost quite a few troops regarding heat exhaustion. And you know who taught us how to handle heat exhaustion? The Chamber of Mines. Because underground, closer to the core of the earth, it's quite hot. Secondly, water is the main thing. But a soldier must carry his water. And in the dry season in Wambuland and wherever, water is a very scarce commodity. And ask the Rhodesian guys about the same problem. And heat exhaustion is a big problem. And we were just given an order of a zero tolerance regarding deaths during heat exhaustion. In Palaborwa, we had to prepare the troops for the operational area. And you know, it's a very hot, but also a humid area. It's very close to the Mozambican side of our country. And there was an index that we had. It's a wet ball and a dry ball thermometer. And you had an index. And that told you phase 1. Then you ceased all training outside. You can carry on, but no physical training, not outside, no physical training. Phase 2, cease training outside. You can go into lecture rooms, watch films, and speak to the guys and all this type of thing. Phase 3, go very, very, very slow. And phase 4, back to the bungalows, stop training. And we reached 8 o'clock in the morning, phase 4. Now, what do? You've got to prepare these troops for the operations. And then we worked very early, got up at about 4 o'clock. And we did a lot of night work because at night time, there was humidity and it was still hot. And then we always spoiled the troops with water because nobody wanted them to be killed with heat exhaustion. And I found this with the infantry school while I was at 5-4 Battalion and in the operational area. They normally came in August. And during their training, they had a lot of water and they ran out of water very quickly. Because in August, it started getting very hot. But then we replenished them with enough water. What we did is we took the 2-liter cool drink bottles, plastic bottles, and by means of a supply parachute, we just dropped that for them in the area. And one day, I'll never forget it. I was in the aircraft, a Kudu aircraft, and one parachute got stuck on the rear tail. And it was oscillating. And this aircraft was also oscillating in front. But luckily, the pilot, old Yaki, he was a sound man and he configured the whole story and he said, okay, don't worry, we're going to land now. And we took a turn and still this thing is oscillating at the back. And he brought it in a hell of a good landing that we did. No problems. Okay, all the bottles were broken and the parachute we just wrote off. But as we were coming, the gunships were coming in from a contact and old Harry Anderson shouted to me, he said, what, are you flying a water card at the moment? But we replenished them with enough water. One has got to adapt to a situation. You can't go and say, these are softies, they just need water. No, give them enough water. And they did quite well. They had a few contacts in my area, in the infantry school, and they did quite well. And remember, one thing that I perhaps just ran over, while at infantry school, they go up and do their rural course in counterinsurgency in the operational area. And they are also deployed. We deployed them even in Angola. So before they get to a unit, they've got a proprietary medal and they've had bush experience. So the troops can't say, yeah, you've been to the school all the time and you know nothing. We know everything. He's been there. He's been there on the job training. But heat exhaustion was a problem, but we adhered to that. And after that, with all these methods, I don't think we lost troops. Some of them in Palaborwa. Per day, 4, 5, 6 into the sick bay, and then they just put them on drip, and there was a nice room with air conditioners, and you pull them through. It's not a weakness in a man if he gets heat exhaustion. He can't help it. It's not that he's weak and he cannot take it. It just happens because heat exhaustion is a very difficult thing. But here, the Chamber of Mines helped us a lot in this situation.
So with the graduates, once they gain experience somewhere, would they come back as instructors?
To the infantry school?
Yes.
Yeah, we used to take the best. They became lieutenants and corporals at the infantry school. And the other guys were sent out. You normally take your good guys to train the other guys. No, they stayed on at the infantry school.
Then I have to ask you, sir, a standard question in the South African Army. How good were your rugby team?
We were good. I used to play rugby till I was a major. The rugby team was good. Well, rugby-wise, we competed against the Army and the Navy. I mean, the Navy and the Air Force. And the Army used to win because our commanders in various areas did their homework and all the Springboks were recruited out there. But our rugby team was good. And once a year, we had a Defence Force Rugby Week where the various commands played against each other. And some good rugby there. No, we enjoyed that very much.
Under whose command would the School of Infantry be?
Directly under, look, in Oudtshoorn there was an aerial command, and for administrative things, personnel and this type of thing, it was the command. There was a brigadier in charge. But for the functional line, directly under Chief of the Army, and the line officer there was the Director of Infantry, but directly Chief of the Army. He was in charge. And then, of course, Chief of the National Defence Force and the State President and all these big wigs there at the top. But it was a Chief of Army function, training function.
After listening to you, sir, I am of the opinion that without the School of Infantry, our leader element would not have been there at junior level.
Most definitely, most definitely. Most definitely. And you know, your leader element at platoon command is vital in any war situation. Now, without that institution, we would have been in big problems.
I have heard from certain people, not on this program, I have to say, not yet, that they felt they were discriminated against in the sense that they should have become officers, and they did not. I suppose that human errors can take place, but I would not like to think that it was on purpose. Would you want to tell us about this selection progress?
This happens in any selection progress. And it's not to say that your good guys who've got the most marks in exams become officers, and your second line of guys become corporals. No, we look for corporal material and instructor material, or we look for officers material. But the guy who didn't make it to lieutenant can still, in his citizen force regiment or his commando or wherever he is, become an officer. And that's where Danitron Combat School came in. He could then go on an officer's course. So there was scope for him to become an officer. And especially with his track record as a corporal or a sergeant, most definitely he could become an officer if he was dedicated to that. But yeah, and it's human, we make mistakes. And every guy that didn't become an officer will tell you, yeah, but the lieutenant didn't like me, and it's because one day I back-chatted the lieutenant and this type of thing, or the sergeant major didn't like me. It's human error and human relations that happen. But the guy still has an opportunity to become an officer, yes.
But there's no appeal procedure.
No,
Once
no,
the decision is made.
Well, we had a lot of politicians coming through, but then there was normally a motivation ready for the situation. Yeah, there's no appeal procedure. Once the guy has been commissioned, you can't take a corporal and then make him a lieutenant just because somebody complained or he felt that he was done in. No. But there was scope for this guy to become an officer if he was really dedicated. I know many of officers that were national service corporals, and then they even went to the recce's and became officers. No, there is scope for that. Depends on the individual.
Is there anything, sir, which I left out about the School of Infantry, which perhaps you can tell us?
No, I think we've covered the vast area, and it is, as you correctly said, without the School of Infantry, there would have been a big vacuum. And remember, each corps, the artillery, the engineers, the armor, they also had their leadership training on the same basis, but of course, giving training and preparing their officers for their mustering, whatever the case might be, for logistics, signals, and all that. But our young men, amen, you went war with them, and you could go to war with them, by all means.
Were there a few of them which couldn't make it, which you had to return to the units?
Yes, mainly medical reasons. The guy picked up a problem. Look, if he broke an arm and a leg and this type of thing during training or so on, he was granted the opportunity depending on the situation. And then, of course, military discipline problems. If he couldn't handle instruction, he didn't pass his tests, he was not fit enough. These are the normal things, but it's got to be a very good reason. Then they were returned. And there's always the human factor, you know. He picked up as we say, a squeal with a lieutenant or with a sergeant major or the captain or major, or whatever the case might be. But there are reasons. But still, yeah, he goes to a unit and he can still become an officer if he's dedicated to become one.
Does the School of Infantry, does it still exist to today? Do we know?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, it's still there, and they carry on with all these functions. No, they're still in Oudtshoorn, they still carry on. They do. And I think it's on the same basis as we discussed what they are doing. And the junior leaders are trained there.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I have to say, we've been talking now more than an hour once again. It's fascinating, so I thank you as always. Because, you know, without you people talking to us, these are knowledge which we will never have. There might be a few people who write a few books about the School of Infantry or the School of Armor, or I suppose there's such a thing as a School of Signals or whatever.
Oh, yeah, yeah. School of Signals, yes.
But unless these people come and talk to us like you're doing now, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't have that first-hand experience. So I thank you for that once again, sir. And I invite all of you, if you want to talk to me while we booked ahead now, I can tell you, But you're still welcome to contact me. It seems that the program got a lot more popular than what I thought possible. We're very grateful for that. We're grateful to you. We thank our Lord. With our team, there's no way we could have done this.
Oh, yes, I fully agree.
And thank you to you, sir, and to all of you. God bless until we meet again.
Thank you, Chris. I really enjoyed speaking to you. It brought back beautiful memories. I wish I could have my time over again. Thank you very much.